Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Raymond Karam, the Chief Program and Development Officer here at AGSIW. I'm delighted that we're hosting this program today as part of our coverage of the evolving climate change policies and responses in the Gulf and the implications of the coronavirus pandemic on climate change agendas in the region. We're deeply honored to have with us today His Excellency Dr. Mohamed bin Mubarak bin Daina, Bahrain's Special Envoy for Climate Affairs and the Chief Executive of the Supreme Council for Environment. Prior to his appointment, Dr. bin Daina was the Deputy Chief Executive of the Supreme Council for Environment. In his current position, he is mandated to cover a number of national environmental issues, including air quality, climate change, environmental impact assessment, pollution control, waste management, land resources, and marine and coastal conservation. Dr. bin Daina has led delegations relevant to the Montreal Protocol, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and various regional and international environmental conferences and summits. He has received his PhD in chemical engineering from Imperial College London and earned his postgraduate certificate in academic practice from York St. John University. He has also been awarded a Fulbright Scholarship by Texas A&M University. Moderating today's session is Ambassador William Roebuck, the Executive Vice President of the Arab Gulf States Institute. He most recently served as a Deputy Special Envoy to the Global Coalition to Defeat ISIS and a Senior Advisor to the Special Representative for Syria Engagement. Ambassador Roebuck served as U.S. Ambassador to Bahrain from 2015 to 2017. Before we get started, my usual disclaimer, the webinar is being recorded today and will be made available on our website tomorrow. Also a reminder to our audience, you will be in listen-only mode, but you can ask your questions through the Q&A function in Zoom. Or you can also tag us on Twitter at Gulf States Inst. With that, Ambassador Roebuck, over to you.
Thank you very much, Raymond. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, in whatever time zone you're in. Welcome, Special Envoy Dr. bin Daina. It's very nice to see you again, to refresh the acquaintance that we had in Bahrain several years ago. I'm happy to have this opportunity to speak with you at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington and discuss these environmental issues. I want to welcome all of our attendees. We have a very good group with some people, very well-informed folks who know these environmental issues well. We'll start our conversation, Dr. bin Daina, and then about halfway through, we'll open it up for questions from the audience, and they'll have a chance to ask their questions. We'll allow plenty of time for that. So as I said, it's great to see you again. I wanted to start just by welcoming you. And I know that environmental issues loom large for all of us. Global warming is grabbing the headlines almost every week, if not more often. Other environmental issues, from oil spills to air pollution, also dominate our attention. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP26, I believe now, is going to meet this year in Glasgow. A lot going on with UN diplomacy. And of course, most recently, the Biden administration has appointed a special envoy for climate issues, former Secretary of State John Kerry. So my question for you to open up, Dr. bin Daina, you're the Chief Executive Officer for the Supreme Council for the Environment in Bahrain and Bahrain's Special Envoy for Climate. What do you see as the most important environmental challenges that Bahrain faces? And how is the Supreme Council working to address those challenges?
First of all, thank you very much for having me here. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, AGIW, for having me here. And thanks to the embassy in Washington, Bahrain Embassy in Washington, and His Excellency the Ambassador for making this happen today. Environment is not a national problem. I believe environment is a global issue. Something that we can learn from the pandemic we're facing now is the environment and the climate change will unite everybody in the world to fight. The risks we do have either from plastics, either from CO2 emissions, either from air pollution, water scarcity, effect on the biodiversity. I believe everybody is facing those issues and these challenges. And it's all related to the human activity. Something that we have learned from this pandemic, that when people stopped moving, the environment revived. This actually puts a pressure on all government to look at what is going to be next. How can we protect ourselves from climate change? How can we go with the sustainable development goals and make sure that we do achieve it? We in Bahrain has been working and doing that before that. What we have done is actually we set up the national program for Bahrain related or interlinked with the sustainable development goals. And we measure our performance as a government program every 4 years, interlinked with the sustainable development goals. And we use the KPIs of this SDGs to monitor our performance. We moved onto removing plastic bags. We started from removing single bags into a biodegradable plastic bags, and we're now on the way to ban all single-use plastic bags. Actually, we are a small island developing states, and we know how vulnerable we are to the climate change. And that's why we are focusing on the adaptation with the climate change. We developed a national adaptation investments plan. We believe that the investments on the climate change can and will create jobs and will help the economy to diversify. And this will serve the purpose into the adaptation with the climate change. The sea level rise is one of the most important issues we're focusing on. We set up a target of 0.5 meter until 2050. And now we're adopting all our shores to adapt with this figures. We've done a simulation study, and this is based on our third communication report that has been submitted to the UNFCCC of the climate change. And a huge percentage of 28% of Bahrain will be flooded if we don't do the sea level protection from the sea level rise. Water scarcity is going to be another important issue. Desertification is very crucial. And as you know, we are heavily dependent on desalination, and the issues with the desalinations until now is going to be difficult if the water temperatures has been increased and if the water circulation on the Gulf is getting lower. This also is a challenge that we're looking at and finding solutions, and especially looking at a renewable energy way of desalination of water. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Daina. Thank you for that laydown. That was a very interesting overview of many of the challenges that Bahrain faces. If I could, I'd like to ask you a follow-up question. Bahrain is heavily dependent on fossil fuels, non-renewable sources of energy, like its neighbors in the Gulf. Could you talk a little bit about the special challenges that Bahrain faces because of this dependence on fossil fuels? And on a related note, because your neighbors face many of the same challenges you do, could you talk a little about the cooperation between Bahrain and your Gulf neighbors on environmental issues? So it's a two-part question if you have a chance to address both of them.
Actually, I think our Vision 2030 is mainly focused on the economic diversifications, and we achieved that. I think we've been working with this from 2008. Now, 80% of our GDP is actually non-oil revenues. I mean, this because the government put a plan into diversifying our economy. The region, yes, is dependent on fossil fuel, but as you know, that the region, believe that trying to move slowly from the oil into more of a renewable energy and to more of energy efficiencies. Um, the circular economy is one of the main projects. The carbon circular economy is one of the main projects that the region is actually working on as a GCC. And we are also looking at the hydrogen energy. I believe, and the fossil fuel until now is one of the main sources of energy everywhere in the world. The whole planet need to move away from fossil fuel, but we have to do it in a way that finding the alternatives. Renewable energy is the alternative, but it doesn't serve all sectors. Unless we have innovations and creativity, we can't move with the plan that we are doing this. The UNFCCC actually and Paris Agreement stated that especially the developing countries need three important parameters: need technology transfer, capacity building, and financing. And hopefully, with the new administration now at the US is back, um, the developed countries will help the developing countries into achieving this goals. As you know, the climate change fund is doesn't deliver, or the budget is not as what has been promised. It's supposed to have $100 billion by 2020, and they are far short than this. This will help the developing countries into transfer their plans and transfer their energy sources away from the fossil fuel.
Thank you. Thank you, Special Envoy bin Daina. I am interested in hearing a little about the acute concerns you have. Let me put it this way. If you had to describe one or two environmental issues that keep you up at night as the chief official for Bahrain focused on the environment, what would you describe as those issues? What concerns you the most, either in the short term or in the intermediate term?
I think pollution in the water is very, very scary for us. We are heavily dependent on desalination plant. Any pollution at the Gulf will cause us a huge issues that we will suffer from water. Um, and the thing is, the Gulf now having some nuclear plants on this Gulf. Any leakage from any of this nuclear plant, that means we're going to shut down our desalination plant. And I believe that the Gulf is actually, and even Bahrain, we don't have much of a reserve of water. So that's why we developed a monitoring radiation plants and detection to monitor the radiation level on the Gulf. And we're looking at alternatives. I mean, the area is actually suffering from water scarcity. The aquifers doesn't reach our need. So 48,000 oil ship going into the Gulf every year. Any oil spill into the Gulf will be catastrophe with the supply for water for people to drink. And leakage from any nuclear power plant will be a disaster for the Gulf. This is one of the main issues that scares me actually and doesn't help me sleep much.
Thank you, sir. In terms of these issues, the oil spills and the problem of nuclear radiation leakage or some sort of accident, is there any framework in the Gulf for cooperating on these issues, or is it pretty much each country works on this by itself?
No, we do have two layers on looking at that. We do have the Gulf Emergency Center, which is actually in Kuwait, and this fights any pollution on the Gulf. And this is kind of program that we are on the Gulf working into any emergency on the water we do face. And we do have an emergency plan that we operate on the Gulf in case of any disaster like this happen. And we do have a regional organization called ROBME. ROBME is an organization which is between the Gulf states and Iraq and Iran as a member. And we do meet regularly, influencing and looking at the options and looking at the way that we collaborate in case of any incident like this has happened. But on the same time, we are locally working on that, and we do have a national emergency in case of any oil spill and a national emergency in case of any radiation pollution at the sea.
Just a quick follow-up on you mentioned the planning that you do with other Bahraini government agencies. I'd just be interested in a quick snapshot of what levels of cooperation do you have with other agencies in the Bahraini government? Do you feel like you're lashed up tightly with key ministries and with the private sector on these environmental issues?
Not at all. We're actually working as a one team to serve Bahrain goals. And Bahrain teams showed that they're working as a team, especially during this pandemic. We do have a national renewable energy plan, and we set up a target until 2025 to be 5% of our energy from renewable. We do have a national energy efficiency plan, which we will conserve around 6% of our energy by 2025, and we're doubling this into 2030. We do have a national plantation and afforestation plan that we make Bahrain green to decrease the temperature. I have done an interesting study that do a satellite image over Bahrain that look at the hot pockets that we do have during summer and how can we use certain type of plants that decrease the temperature on this area. Those plants has to be efficient in terms of water, and it has not affected the infrastructure or the roots, and it has less maintenance, and it absorbs high CO2. So we're working into a national adaptation plan, as I told you before, and it will be done by different entities and stakeholders, and develop a financial mechanism to fund this energy to make it economically feasible projects. This is what is in the back of my mind that I can tell you of projects that we're working together. And we have voluntarily submitted to the United Nations our report for our Bahrain achievement to the sustainable developments. And as I told you, the government program every 4 years is linked to the sustainable development goals, and we will keep monitoring ourselves to how much we can achieve from these goals.
Thank you, Dr. Daina. One other question on the special challenges that Bahrain and the Gulf face, and then I'll widen the perspective a little bit and talk about some international environmental issues. Obviously, Bahrain, like most of the Gulf, faces very high temperatures in the summer. It's very, very hot. Air conditioning is a huge issue, a huge technology that Bahrain leans on, like other countries in the Gulf. Could you give us a sense about how Bahrain is dealing with the issue of HFCs and developing non-HFC type elements to use for air conditioning? Not to get too technical about it, but just a general sense of, because I know this is a concern both in Bahrain and also in the broader global environment. There's an effort to address this issue.
We all worked under Montreal Protocol into amendment of Kigali Amendment. And as you know, the Kigali Amendment, how is the world is going to move from the HFC? But the problem is that all the studies that we have done and participated with either with the UNIDO or with the UNDP to develop chillers or air conditioning for the high ambient temperature has failed until now. So we're looking forward into how we can move from the HFC, but we couldn't find the technology that really worked with the high ambient temperature. We are actually phasing out the HCFC, as you know, and we're moving into more of the HFC, but we're trying to move into a more efficient HFC that has low GHG, has low emissions, if I may say, until we can find the right technology to move into the alternative. We looked at the different technologies that has been done either by Europe, and we had an issue with the safety of those and with the performance of those technologies. It can work well with a moderate to a very good temperature, but it's not working with high ambient temperature. We even have done testing with the American companies and with different kind of technologies on the region, and I'm sorry to say, but it was not working. And that's why the high ambient temperature country has been exempted from Kigali Amendment, and we'll do a review of this on 2025.
Thank you, Dr. Daina. That's a great update. I know it's a very difficult issue for Bahrain and also for all the other Gulf countries to deal with, but that's a good summary from you about the challenges. It sounds like a lot of it is actually technological challenges. If I could shift the perspective, Dr. Daina, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Bahrain's efforts to comply with the Paris Agreement and your assessment about how the Gulf in general has sought to work with the Paris Agreement and with the UN framework, the UN Convention framework on climate change.
We were one of the first countries that ratified Paris Agreement. We believe that Paris Agreement is the right pathway into reducing emissions and to adapt with the climate change. But there's also still a challenging and going to be discussed on the COP in Glasgow. Article 6, and I don't want to go technical on that, Article 6 is going to be discussed. And this is one of the most important challenge. But three parameters I believe is crucial. And from the history of the of the of the UNFCCC and the climate change, there is a responsibility on everyone, but it is common but differentiated responsibilities. The common differentiated responsibility is a terminology that has been done, an all agreement based that the developing countries get the help from the developed countries to achieve those goals. And this helps will be by a technology transfer, capacity building, financing. All this needed to get everybody on board, especially the small islands and the least developing countries desperately needed this help to go with the world into fighting those climate change. Um, but I'm really optimistic, especially now with the new administration. I had a great talk with Secretary John Kerry, and we believe that the region we're going to have a meeting. I just received the invitation on the 4th of April with the Secretary as a Gulf countries to discuss how we can move forward and how can we help on achieving this goals. The whole region, I believe, is really committed into Paris Agreement. And we, all of us, has been submitted the National Determination Contribution, the NDC, and we're actually everybody now is working into more ambition NDC, and this is what Bahrain and the Gulf is really working on.
Thank you, Dr. Daina. I have one other question, and then I'm going to open this up a little bit and let the audience ask you some questions, which, as Raymond explained, we'll handle through the chat function. And I may circle back at the end if there's time and ask you another question or two. But could you just give us a sense of how, without getting too much into the details of it, because we're not going to talk about COVID and the pandemic, but I just would be interested in your sense of how much the COVID pandemic has affected your efforts to do environmental work over the past year, whether it's in Bahrain or at the international diplomatic levels. What's been the impact of COVID?
As you know, COVID hit everybody's economy, but I believe Bahrain, by the leadership of His Royal Highness the Crown Prince Prime Minister, has done a great job on protecting the people, and I believe they put the people first. I believe we are one of the first countries has done the stimulus package, and this stimulus package helped the economy to be sustained. But on the environmental perspective, as I told you, I mean, you have seen, I'm sure, the photos of Europe or anywhere else that the air quality was improved during the pandemic because everybody was at home. So if it does tell us that the humans are the main sources of the pollution, that's why we need to work hard and to mitigate those pollutions and to go into more environmental friendly way to deal with the issues, either more into the electrical car or more into renewable energies. And all this it is done and it is doable. The challenges that we faced, I believe, as during the pandemic, mainly the financial issues. And the financial issues, each country has to look at where finance is going to be focused and how can we redirect our financials. And I believe we worked as if nothing happened. Luckily, Bahrain never locked down, and we always has been open.
Mhm.
We decrease the number of people goes to work, but we mitigate, I believe, the COVID in a very wise way. Never, never do a full lockdown. What we have done is we incentivize people to go work from home. We help them go from home. We support them with laptops, and we work. So nothing much, honestly, has been affected from my work perspective, except that I didn't travel for any meetings, which is good because my footprint went down. But here we are now. We're doing Zoom, so we know about Zoom now, which we were not using it much from before, and it's proved that it is efficient.
Right.
We can use and dialogue during Zoom.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you, sir. I'm just going to ask you a follow-up, and we'll see if there are questions from the audience after. You mentioned former Secretary of State Kerry is going to have a meeting with Gulf officials focused on the environment in April, early April. What are your expectations for that meeting, and in general for Secretary Kerry's efforts?
I was there in 2015 when Paris Agreement has been done, and we all attended the negotiation and the discussion with him during writing this Paris Agreement. And we're counting now on the U.S. to take the lead of the world to help Paris Agreement to see the light. We believe the international collaboration and the leadership, and now UK is actually leading this COP 26, and I believe that I had a meeting with them as a consultation meeting.
Mhm.
They're doing a great job on getting everybody on board. You need everybody on board from the world to agree on the goals, and everybody is agreeing on these goals. 2 degrees and working into 1.5 degrees centigrade. We can't afford as a world to go beyond this temperatures.
Mhm.
This, a catastrophe will happen.
Mhm.
We are now suffering from COVID. We will suffer more and more by having a higher temperature. So we're working closely with the US government. Now we are in the process on having more tech. Bahrain is working into having a workshop with the US government and the presidency and the region to discuss before COP26 the technical issues we do have and how we can resolve it before we go into the COP. We are positive and we are looking forward into a successful COP on 26. Now we're looking at what is the mechanism of adopting Paris Agreement, and region is a player on politically on adopting Paris Agreement, and we are really positive on working with everybody on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Daina. So we have a question from one of our audience members. What role does the private sector play in the fight against climate change? And how are you focusing on that effort in cooperating with the private sector in Bahrain on environmental issues?
Private, we as government are only a regulator. The private sector are the machines that go in to do all the projects that is related to the climate change. Now, if we set up a national adaptation investment plan, and there is plans for an adaptation, who's going to do it? The private sector is going to do it, but we have to find the financial mechanism that make it economically feasible for them to do this project. And as you know, now we do have more target to move into 5% renewable energies. So this goal will not be achieved if it is not the private sector is going to do this renewable energy. 100 megawatt that we are doing it now over an old landfill. The private sector is actually doing this project. So the private sector is actually the machine that's going to help the government to adopt or to mitigate with the climate change.
Thank you. Another question, Special Envoy bin Daina from the audience. Is Bahrain considering carbon capture and storage as part of its climate change mitigation efforts? And can we expect a carbon capture and storage plant in Bahrain?
We started that maybe 7-8 years ago on one of our petrochemicals that we do have, and this is a technology that we think is going to work very efficiently if we can do it. And the technology is now, as you know, from the renewable energy, if we can listen, like the solar, the cost is make it now economically feasible to have a renewable or a solar farm than using the fossil fuel. So the carbon capture is one of the projects that we are really working and we're looking at and to enhance more and more of carbon capture. Saudis is actually focusing into the carbon circular economy and to more of carbon capture, and then using the carbon capture into another industries. And this is things that we are really working on.
Thank you, Special Envoy. Let me see. I'm just resurveying the audience questions. While I'm pulling those together, let me ask you another question that's focused on Bahrain. It's really about the intersection between environmental issues and biodiversity and culture. Could you give us a sense about what how you see those two issues intersecting? Is Bahrain focused on doing some things to protect biodiversity that it also views as part of its cultural heritage or special aspects of its culture or environment?
Yeah, sure. We have a site which is double the size of the land of Bahrain, 1,363 kilometers square. Our land is only 700 or around 740. So the site is actually historically is the pearl divers site. All the pearl divers in the past before oil. This is our main generation of economy was having the pearls, and the pearl industry in Bahrain that has been gone after oil. What we are trying to do is to bring it back as an ecotourism site. What we have done is we registered this site under UNESCO as heritage site, and it has registered under UNESCO. On a national level, we have registered it as a protected area. And this site now is the first site, I believe, in the world that let anybody, especially for a tourism, that he can go there, dive for oysters, and then he can bring it back, open, and if he find a pearl, it is his. And we developed a state-of-art lab in Bahrain that do the analysis on the pearls, so they can give you a certificate on the grading of these pearls. Now we're looking at into how we can make an auctions for only pearls in Bahrain. So it's a full ecotourism project that we have developed and unique experience. And the advantage of this that it will only take you and 45 minutes from the place that you sail to go to this site, and you can dive for a pearl, and when you find a pearl, it is all yours.
Very good. Dr. Daina, I have another question from the audience. Emissions.
You might ask me, is this environmental friendly or not? Let me tell you something about oysters.
Please.
Oysters, when they grow, they grow above each other.
Mm.
When they grow above each other, they kill the one at the bottom. So the one at the bottom dies. So the more you collect, the more that they regenerate.
Mm.
So this is an environmental friendly way of protecting the oysters from killing each other.
Interesting. Interesting. It's also a very fascinating way that Bahrain is working with its history as a long tradition of pearl diving and harvesting this. Let me ask you a question from the audience, Dr. Daina. So emissions from transportation greatly contribute to carbon emissions. Is Bahrain considering investing in alternative transportation methods to combat transport emissions?
We do have three important things. One of them is public transport. The public transport, we're enhancing our public transport. Now we do create buses of a way, and this bus is going to be a more energy efficient buses. And as you know, the public transport was not the main transportation method in Bahrain, but now it's getting the momentum. We're working into developing the metro in Bahrain now as part of a national strategy to mitigate the emissions from the car. And at the same time, we're actually on the registrations of cars, we're measuring the emissions of cars, and we are making it into an international standards of emissions. We enhance now the methodology of having an electrical car. We are developing a charging station in all gas stations and in malls in Bahrain to promote the electrical cars. And this is one of the things that we are working on under our national air quality strategy.
Thank you, Dr. Mohamed. I have a question from the audience now that blends political concerns and environmental concerns. In light of the Abraham Accords, what type of collaboration over climate do you envisage happening between Israel and Bahrain?
As you know, the relationship is just started. What we have done is we had a meeting with the Ministry of Environment in Israel, and we developed a draft and looking forward to sign the MOU between us and Israel. Israel, I think, also facing, and I think they have good technologies on dealing with water scarcity, and this is one of the main topics that we are really discussing with them.
Great. Thank you for that insight. I know that observers from the United States and elsewhere are looking with great interest at the Abraham Accords and how they will have an impact in many different areas. And certainly, I think the environment is one where they can have a positive role to play. If I could ask you a question, Dr. Daina, to focus on Bahrain's, I would call it topography, maybe. Bahrain has done a lot of land reclamation projects in the last 40 years or more, and increased its surface area. Has that created, in your view, environmental challenges that need to be dealt with?
I always say this, any reclamation has been done in Bahrain, it goes under the environmental impact assessment study. This environmental impact assessment study in Bahrain is recognized by the World Bank as a best practice that has been done. What we are doing is we're using an environmental consultant to create a methodology to reclaim those lands without any impact on, or would mitigate the impact, to be honest, on the environment. But looking at this site now, it's one of the most resilient sites with the sea level rise because it was reclaimed above the sea level rise of the shore. Now, this, from our recent study, will be a buffer and protected area from the sea level rise. It does have certain damage, but this damage is mitigated by procedures and the process that we do into allowing them to reclaim the sites.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Another question, Dr. Daina, from the audience. Could you please speak about Bahrain and Gulf members' position on carbon pricing? What carbon price is viable by 2025 to promote efficiency in oil and gas, in your view?
I don't think we do have figures until now. It's carbon pricing, it's an idea that has been discussed. And but let me tell you this, and my personal point of view. Are we going to allow whoever can afford to pay this price to have an emission, higher emissions than what is normal because they can pay the price of the carbon? While other countries that they can't afford this, they should get paid for somebody is polluting. Is this a fair way to do it? I believe that everybody has a responsibility to reduce the emissions. This reducing and reduction in emission, if with the new technology, will not affect the economies. The NDCs will show us who's going to increase on the emissions and who's going to be lower on the emissions. And I believe as international commitment, we all have to draw a line into the emissions that the country is going to produce and make sure that we reduce our own emissions. This is my way of thinking, and you can't just use poor countries by taking the advantage of them for paying them the carbon for the emissions that the rich countries can produce.
Thank you. Dr. Mohamed, we spoke earlier, you did, about the parameters by which, under Article 6, developed countries would assist developing countries in reaching some of these environmental goals. And you mentioned technology transfer, financing, capacity building. Could you give us Could you expand just a little bit on those? Just give us a sense of what it is that the developing countries expect from developed countries in terms of assistance.
I mean, let's look at, for example, let's look at the sea level rise, for example. And there is a vulnerable countries, especially the small islands, which they know that by 2050 or by 2100, 50% or 20% of their shores is going to be flooded. Those countries, the population of these countries is going to suffer from this. So what this countries needs is actually a way to adapt with this. And you need the climate change fund to finance them to do this adaptation with the climate change. They are a small island and they're not a high emission countries that produces the catastrophe of the climate change. So they deserve to be helped. They deserve to be helped on the adaptations, with the sea level rise, for example. And you can benchmark on that. They're going to be effective. Their sources of food is the sea. With the increases of the temperatures of the sea, the coral reefs are bleaching and the fish reserves is going down. So we need also to help them to either develop projects to adapt with this. So this is the main concept I think that the developing countries, for example, as I'm giving you to make it simple, is needed. So that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Mohamed. I think we have time for one more question from the audience. Can you speak about waste reduction, such as food waste and waste management efforts in Bahrain in terms of landfill use versus incineration?
I think this is one of the main things that we are looking at in Bahrain. The food waste is an international issue, and sadly, what's happening is these percentages are increasing. Um, in Bahrain, I think we had, and I personally participate on one of the NGOs that worked as a food bank. And the food bank is actually collecting this food from mainly from restaurants and from hotels to help it to for the people that can't afford the food. But the thing is, it's a style of life. I mean, it's a style of life, the number of waste that we are producing. The average is actually increasing. In Bahrain, we developed a national waste strategy that worked from reducing the amount of waste into the collection of waste and aggregate this waste, then taking it to the landfill. Now we're doing a feasibility study on having a waste to energy plant. We believe this will reduce the amount of waste that will go to the landfill. But we're also doing initiatives into reducing the quantities that will go into even the waste to energy. Reducing the plastics is one of the main things that we're working on. We believe it has a higher percentage that we can eliminate from going into the waste. Electronic waste is one of the issues that we're working on now. And this national strategy for waste, we develop it because we are small islands and we can't afford having a landfill, and we have to reduce the amount of waste. We're starting now in 4 to 5 areas to develop segregation, the waste from the source. to make sure that the recycling companies can collect this waste from the houses.
Thank you, Dr. Mohamed. I think maybe we can squeeze in one more question from the audience if you allow us.
I'm all yours, don't worry.
Okay. So you mentioned water scarcity as an issue in your opening remarks. What, in your view, are the most important plans for Bahrain to make its water more secure, its water sources more secure beyond desalination? Or do you have you developed other plans?
We do now. We have the TSE water. We are using the sewage plants to produce the TSE water, and we're using this water into the landscaping. And we're going to reduce a huge amount of water using this water into the landscaping. We can't use it for agriculture, as you know, because unless it is tertiary recycled. And we're also doing a pilot into the tertiary recycling and to do with the potable water, but we're using renewable energy. But this is only a pilot until now. So, and we developed a national water strategy to look at the options that we do have. We're looking at the grey water from housing also. How can we reuse it instead of it is going to the sewage plants? And building, I believe, a desalination plant using renewable energy is one of the options. I know that you mentioned you don't want to know about the desalinations, but sadly, we have aquifer is a drying, have a very little rain. And this is what makes me really concerned of what if we can't desalinate, either by radiation pollution or an oil spill.
Thank you, Dr. Mohamed. I think we will have to leave it at that. I want to thank you for your presentation of your answers today. You've really done a masterful job of combining a lot of expertise on environmental issues with good communication skills. And I think you really elaborated on these issues to our audience at AGSIW in ways that have made these issues more clear about Bahrain, but also the challenges the Gulf faces. I want to thank you on behalf of the Institute, and I want to thank the Bahraini Embassy also for helping to facilitate this. So thank you, Dr. Mohamed. We really appreciate your participation today.